Kieran Dorne was a brilliant environmental scientist, respected in every academic circle, until his wife, Celia, found a hidden key that unlocked the door to a nightmare no one saw coming. Behind his gentle smile and quiet routines was a chilling, double life, one built on surveillance, control, and a trail of missing persons. When Celia stumbled upon his darkest secret, she didn't just uncover a mystery, she became the next target in his twisted game. Celia Dorne had always believed in simple joys. A warm cup of tea, the quiet rustle of trees outside her art studio, and the gentle smile of her husband Kieran, who returned home every evening at exactly 6:15 p.m. Their house in Ashbridge, a small town nestled between wooded hills and lazy rivers, was the kind of place people wrote about in lifestyle magazines. Everything looked picture-perfect. Celia painted whimsical creatures for children's books, a career she had grown into with quiet passion. Her world was colorful, peaceful, and carefully structured. Kieran Dorne, her husband of 9 years, was the kind of man others admired. Meticulous, calm, and brilliant, he worked as an environmental scientist for a government-funded research institute. His work often took him to remote locations, forests, marshlands, and energy conferences in major cities. Celia never minded his travel. She understood it was part of his calling, and in his absence, she poured herself into her illustrations. Kieran always brought back something thoughtful for her: a smooth pebble from an Icelandic river, a pressed flower from a South American jungle, or a rare book from a dusty European shop. Each gift had a story, and Celia cherished them all. Their neighbors often commented on how well they fit together. Celia, with her soft laughter and warm eyes, was the heart of the home. Kieran, quiet but kind, was the foundation. Together, they hosted garden brunches in spring, attended charity drives in winter, and never seemed to have an argument, at least not one loud enough for the walls to hear. Kieran's study in the basement was the only part of the house that felt off-limits. It had a thick steel door that required a fingerprint to open. He explained it away as a necessary measure for protecting sensitive research. Celia had asked about it once, early in their marriage, but he gave such a technical explanation about government protocol and data protection that she never brought it up again. She trusted him. That was the cornerstone of their relationship. Or so she believed. Despite her deep love for Kieran, there were moments, brief, fleeting, when something about him felt unreachable. He rarely spoke about his past or his childhood. He had no close friends, and his family, he claimed, had passed away long ago in an accident he didn't like to discuss. He filled his time with work, long walks alone in the woods, and meticulous organization. Celia sometimes teased him about being too neat, how he couldn't go to bed without checking the locks 3 times, or how every spoon in the kitchen had to face the same direction. He would just smile, kiss her forehead, and change the subject. Then, there were the phone calls, rare, but always at odd hours. He would step outside, speak in a low voice, and return looking slightly more distant. Celia chalked it up to work stress. Kieran often said that his research involved dealing with sensitive ecological data, illegal dumping, endangered species, climate change models. She believed him. Why wouldn't she? On their 9th anniversary, Kieran surprised her with a trip to the coast. They stayed in a glass cabin overlooking the sea. He cooked her dinner, and they watched the sunset in silence. Celia looked at him and thought, "This is happiness. This is real." She had no way of knowing that the man sitting beside her, smiling into the golden light, had built their entire life on a carefully constructed lie. In Ashbridge, nothing ever really changed. The same mail carrier delivered letters every morning. The same shopkeeper waved from across the street. But under the surface of that small-town calm, a secret darker than anyone could imagine was quietly hiding behind locked doors and smiles. Celia didn't know it yet, but the man she had loved for nearly a decade had been hiding something so horrific, so calculated, that once it came to light, her entire world would fall apart piece by piece. It started with a slip, something so small that most people would have missed it. One morning, Kieran left in a rush for a conference in Bristol. He was always careful, methodical, but that day, he forgot his watch and a set of documents on the kitchen counter. Celia noticed a sense of urgency in his movements that didn't match his usual calm demeanor. He kissed her on the cheek, muttered something about being late, and was gone before she could ask any questions. Later that afternoon, while tidying up, Celia opened the drawer of his nightstand to put away the forgotten watch. As she slid the drawer back in, something underneath caught her attention. A small piece of paper sticking out from the false bottom she had never noticed before. Curious, she lifted the base of the drawer and discovered a hidden compartment. Inside was an old brass key, smooth with age, and a folded envelope with no writing on it. Her heart began to race. The key wasn't like the others in their home. It had an unusual shape, long and narrow with teeth that suggested it belonged to a safe or an antique lock. Celia turned it over in her hands, unsure of what to make of it. She opened the envelope and found a single photograph, grainy and taken at night. It showed the back of a woman walking alone down a street, unaware she was being followed. The photo sent a chill through her. She didn't recognize the woman, but something about the picture felt deeply wrong. Kieran had always been private about his work, but this felt different. The image didn't belong with his research. There was no explanation for it, no context. Just a key and a picture of a stranger in the dark. Celia didn't sleep that night. Her thoughts kept circling the photo, the strange key, and the study in the basement. For years, she had accepted the locked door as part of Kieran's world, something she didn't need to understand. But now, with him out of town and her nerves unraveling, curiosity turned to fear. She walked down to the basement and stood before the steel door. The keypad blinked red, waiting for a fingerprint. She pressed her own against it, knowing it wouldn't work. It didn't. She sat on the cold basement steps for a long time, the key in her hand, the silence pressing in. Eventually, she went, back upstairs and searched through their files, hoping to find more answers. What she found instead was a black flash drive tucked inside an old physics textbook on Kieran's shelf. It was labeled in thick black marker, Project Solstice. She turned it over slowly, uncertain what to do. Every instinct told her to stop, to put everything back and forget she ever saw it. But something deeper pushed her forward. She plugged it into her laptop, her breath caught in her throat. A folder appeared instantly, and within it were more folders, each named after a person. Some names were unfamiliar. Others made her heart stop. One of them was a woman she vaguely remembered. From a news story about a missing person last year, another matched the name of a young man whose photo she'd seen on a flyer near the town library. Each folder was filled with surveillance photos, handwritten notes scanned into PDFs, and GPS coordinates. Celia's stomach turned as she realized what she was looking at. These were people Kieran had tracked. He had documented their movements, their routines, even their weaknesses, and they were all missing. Celia backed away from the computer, her body trembling. She felt the walls of her home closing in, no longer a place of comfort but a cage built on lies. Her mind raced through the memories, his late-night calls, his cold silences, the way he avoided questions about the past. She knew she had to do something, but she couldn't go to the police and tell them her husband might be involved in something sinister, not without risking everything. So she made the call anonymously, claimed she found a suspicious flash drive belonging to a neighbor. It was a desperate move, but it was the only way she could begin to uncover the truth. What she didn't know was that the truth was far darker than she had ever imagined. The contents of the flash drive were unlike anything the local authorities had seen before. After Celia made the anonymous call, the device was quickly turned over to the regional police's cyber investigations unit. A young technician named Lyle Merrick, known for his attention to digital patterns, began sorting through the files. Within minutes, it was clear this wasn't the work of a curious mind or a conspiracy theorist. The documents were deliberate, organized, and deeply unsettling. There were 7 main folders, each named after a different person. They varied in age, background, and location, but what linked them was more horrifying than anything Lyle had expected. Each individual had gone missing within the past 4 years, and all their cases remained unsolved. Inside each folder were time-stamped surveillance images taken over weeks, sometimes months. The quality varied, but the content was unmistakable. Photos taken from behind trees, through windows, across streets. Images of people eating, walking their dogs, picking up children from school, completely unaware they were being watched. Some folders contained notes, scanned journal entries, and audio logs. In one, a voice calmly narrated a routine. Subject: leaves apartment at 6:47 a.m., jogs 2 blocks north, avoids main road. In another, there was a hand-drawn floor plan of a small house, with exits marked in red and the phrase "silent entry possible" scribbled in the margin. One particular document stopped the investigation in its tracks. It was a digital map, marked with red pins, each corresponding to the last known location of the missing individuals. Beside each pin was a date. Some were in the past, 2 were in the future. And the location for one of those upcoming dates was a secluded forested area just outside of Ashbridge. By this point, the police knew they weren't just looking at research or obsession, they were looking at premeditated criminal planning. Every document, every photo, pointed to a calculated, patient mind, and it was all stored neatly, without a single wasted file. Whoever KD was, the initials used in metadata and file tags, had taken enormous care to remain undetected. When investigators began tracing the document origins, they found more disturbing patterns. Metadata from the photographs revealed camera models that matched those bought under the name Kieran Dorne from several online retailers. Receipts were tied to a P.O. box in a nearby town, one that hadn't been visited in months. The flash drive even contained anonymized server access logs. Kieran had used VPNs, encrypted messaging, and disposable email accounts to communicate with someone referred to only as AH. The conversations were fragmented but hinted at. Trades, information for silence, data for anonymity. Celia remained unaware of how far the investigation had progressed. She was contacted only once, under the pretense of verifying neighborhood surveillance following a rise in thefts. The officer asked a few vague questions, noted her answers, and left. She was too frightened to admit that she had planted the flash drive as an anonymous tip. She feared Kieran might find out if the investigation leaked. Every night, she went to bed staring at the study door, wondering what was behind it. The key she found didn't open it, but she felt it must unlock something else. Something important. Detectives pieced together the connections between the victims. They discovered one terrifying detail. None of the victims had any known link to Kieran. They lived in different states, held different jobs, and belonged to unrelated communities. The only connection was him. He had moved silently, leaving no fingerprints, no obvious motive, and no witnesses. He hadn't killed on impulse. These were planned disappearances executed with surgical precision. The most chilling file was labeled simply CD, Phase 5. Investigators hadn't figured out what it meant, but the initials sent a jolt through one detective's spine. They matched Celia Dorne. Though the file was empty, the name itself was enough to raise alarm. Was she a future target? A final piece of something bigger? No one could say yet. But they knew time was running out. The discovery of the labeled map and the cryptic CD Phase 5 file pushed the investigation into overdrive. Authorities feared they were not only dealing with a meticulous predator, but one who was actively planning another disappearance, possibly even a murder. The red pin placed in Emmer Valley, scheduled for just days away, became their priority. Emmer Valley was sparsely populated, mostly farmland and abandoned properties that had fallen into disrepair. It was the kind of place people didn't think twice about, which made it the perfect location for something unspeakable to happen without notice. A team of detectives, supported by forensic experts and tactical units, moved into the area quietly. They followed the coordinates on the digital map, which led them to a long-forgotten farmhouse at the edge of the valley. The house was surrounded by overgrown brush and a crumbling fence. To the untrained eye, it looked deserted, but the officers noticed recent tire tracks, disturbed soil, and faint boot prints leading toward the back entrance. They moved in. The front door had been reinforced from the inside, so entry had to be forced. The moment they stepped into the house, they knew something was terribly wrong. It wasn't the smell, although there was one, a faint chemical tang, mixed with something more metallic. It was the silence. It wasn't the silence of abandonment. It was the kind of silence that absorbs sound, as if the place itself didn't want to reveal what had happened there. Room by room, they moved through the building. Dust had been cleared in certain areas. Equipment was neatly arranged on tables. Cameras, ropes, medical kits, and notebooks. One officer opened a drawer and found dozens of photographs. They matched the missing persons from the flash drive. Some were bound, others unconscious, but all were caught in the same cold, clinical frame. In the basement, they found what could only be described as a facility. Not a lab, not a shelter, something in between. The walls were lined with noise-canceling foam, the floor covered in plastic. A surgical table stood at the center under industrial lighting. Tools were laid out with surgical precision: scalpels, syringes, vials of unknown liquids. A camera was mounted above the table, connected to a recording system. It had been recently used. There were small, windowless rooms built along one side of the basement. Each had a thick door with a sliding panel. Inside, they found restraints, soundproofing, and feeding ports. One room still held traces of hair and blood. Another had scratch marks on the wall. DNA samples were quickly collected and later matched to 2 victims on the missing persons list. Behind one false wall, they found what chilled even the most hardened officers: a pit. A literal underground chamber accessed through a narrow hatch. Inside were personal items from the victims: jewelry, scraps of clothing, torn pages from notebooks. It was a graveyard of evidence, sealed and buried beneath layers of deception. There was no doubt now. Kieran Dorne had been operating a private chamber of horror for years, using his knowledge of biology, chemistry, and environmental sciences to control, torture, and erase his victims. He hadn't just stalked them. He had studied them, broken them down piece by piece, then vanished them without a trace. Outside, officers found a backup generator and a hidden panel for satellite uplinks. It was clear that Kieran had intended for this place to function long-term, away from prying eyes. It was remote, self-sustaining, and built to serve one purpose: facilitating evil under the mask of science. By the time forensics teams finished their initial sweep, it was already dark. They had uncovered only a portion of what had taken years to construct, but the evidence was enough to issue an immediate nationwide alert. Kieran Dorne was no longer a missing piece in a puzzle. He was the center of it. And now, for the first time, they had a trail, but no one knew where he was, or if Celia was still safe. Celia Dorne sat in her kitchen, staring at the empty chair across from her, where Kieran had eaten breakfast just 3 days ago. The weight of silence around her felt unnatural, like the house itself had stopped breathing. The authorities hadn't contacted her directly, but she sensed something had shifted. The anonymous flash drive, the key, the strange photograph. Everything she had uncovered was now spiraling into something far more terrifying than she had imagined. That morning, a black SUV had parked across the street, its windows tinted too, dark to see inside. An hour later, another vehicle appeared, plain, unmarked. Celia began to feel watched, not in the comforting way her neighbors waved through the window, but in the cold, methodical way Kieran had observed his victims. She was now at the center of the story, and though she had tried to remain hidden, behind her anonymity, the circle was tightening. Unbeknownst to her, a nationwide manhunt had been launched. Kieran's name and face were quietly circulated to law enforcement agencies under a high-level federal alert, but no public announcement had been made. Authorities feared it would send him into hiding if he wasn't already. The farmhouse in Emmer Valley had provided a wealth of evidence, but Kieran had vanished before they arrived. No fingerprints, no DNA, not even a recent footprint. It was as if he had known the timeline of the investigation and slipped away just in time. Back in Ashbridge, Celia tried to hold herself together. She couldn't sleep, barely ate, and avoided the basement entirely. She still had the old brass key, but hadn't discovered what it opened. Every time she looked at it, a wave of dread passed through her. She began checking the locks 3 times before bed, just like Kieran used to. She knew that wasn't coincidence anymore. He had always been watching, preparing, anticipating. 2 days after the farmhouse raid, a package arrived at her doorstep. It was small, wrapped in brown paper with no return address. Her hands shook as she carried it inside. Inside was a flash drive. No note, no markings, just the device. With trembling fingers, she plugged it into her laptop, afraid of what she might see. A single video file appeared, titled, "For Her Eyes Only." The screen faded from black to an image of Kieran sitting in what looked like a dimly lit cabin. He stared directly into the camera, calm and collected. He didn't speak. Instead, he held up a series of cue cards. Each one contained a short message. You looked. You always would. They were necessary. You were not supposed to find out, but now you know, and now you are part of it. Don't go to the police. Don't trust anyone. Phase 5 has already begun. The video ended with a still image of Celia sleeping in bed, taken from inside their home. She dropped the laptop in horror. The timestamp was from the night before. Authorities were contacted immediately. For Celia's protection, she was moved to a secure location under round-the-clock surveillance. The image confirmed what they feared. Kieran had returned to Ashbridge undetected. He had been inside the house. He was watching her even now. The hunt intensified. Borders were alerted. Forests were combed. Airports were scanned. But Kieran remained a ghost. Weeks passed, then months. Investigators connected his name to missing persons cases stretching across 5 countries. His real identity was eventually questioned. Birth records, education, even his scientific credentials began to unravel. It appeared Kieran Dorne was just another layer of his lie. As for Celia, she never returned to their home. The art, studio, the garden, the life she thought was real, it all became a memory tainted by evil. She still carried the key, though. It hadn't opened anything yet, but she kept it close, a grim reminder that some secrets are never truly buried. Somewhere, out there, Kieran was still watching, still planning. And she knew, deep down, it wasn't over. Not yet.